Hello, everyone, and welcome to First Fridays, a webinar series about the business of being a spiritual writer. These informal conversations take place on the first Friday of every month. Today, our guest is our good friend, Kathy Izard. Kathy is an award-winning author and speaker who helped bring transformation to Charlotte in homelessness, housing, and mental health. Kathy led the development of More Place, the city's first permanent supportive housing for chronically homeless men and women, and led the development campaign for Hopeway, Charlotte's first nonprofit residential mental health treatment center. Her memoir, The 100-Story Home, received a 2017 Christopher Award and has been featured on NPR as well as The Today Show. In 2019, she released A Good Night for Mr. Coleman, which is a children's book written to encourage kids to dream big and do good. Kathy is a recipient of the Bank of America Neighborhood Hero Award, the North Carolina Housing Volunteer of the Year Award, and was recognized as a William J. Clinton Distinguished Guest Lecturer. Kathy's also going to be a featured speaker at our upcoming Writing for Your Life conference in Charlotte this March. So welcome, Kathy. So good to have you here.
Thanks, Brian. I'm excited to see you in a couple of weeks live in Charlotte.
Yes, absolutely. Well, so I briefly discussed your previous work, but since you have the history of first having self-published, then traditional published, perhaps you can tell that story in a little more detail.
Yeah, so as you were reading, a lot of the work that I'd done was in nonprofit, and I wasn't really maybe considering being an author, but I started writing down the stories of the work of doing More Place and how in working with the homeless, I kind of found my own way home. And I was just going to tell those stories, and I started going to writing workshops. One in particular really transformed the way I was looking at the book more instead of just straight nonfiction into memoir. And so I worked on that for about 4 years, and I started going through the process in 2014 of looking for an agent and a publisher, and I had no interest. I couldn't get anyone interested in working on this, maybe because I had zero platform and I didn't even understand what platform was at the time. So I spent 2 more years writing it and refining it, and then I self-published in 2016. And it started being passed from book club to Sunday school. I ended up selling several thousand copies. And at that point, after I'd already had it out in the market, I guess for a year self-published, I did end up getting a book contract with HarperCollins Christian, Thomas Nelson, and was able to have it come out in a new edition in 2018. So I think it's unusual to have done self-publishing and then finally got the book contract. So I can advise authors on what it's like to do both. So.
Well, obviously, I'm really glad that happened because that's a phenomenal book. And as you said, it's a relatively unique path. So I thought it was important to highlight that to folks so that they know that is indeed not only possible, but here's a living example.
It is. It's possible. I think it's unusual, but yes, it is possible.
So let's talk a little bit more about one of the aspects of what you just mentioned, and that is with agents. So can you tell us how you first found an agent and how you work together?
Well, as I said, in 2014, I tried that very brutal process of query letters and trying to get someone interested. I lost count of how many people turned me down, but many turned me down during that process. And it wasn't until I'd sold, I think, almost 7,000 copies self-published that I started it was hard to sell them out of my garage and be lugging them back and forth. And I thought, well, I wonder if a traditional publisher would care at this point. And so a friend of mine introduced me to an agent who lived in Charlotte. Her name's Sally McMillan. She traditionally represented fiction, so nonfiction was unusual for her. But she read the story and she decided that she would take me on. So I think I was lucky, one, and that it was a friend of a friend. Two, that I'd already done a lot of work over a year and a half of figuring out how hard it was to sell books one by one by one, my own, and then worked on a nonfiction book proposal that we would then take it to Thomas Nelson. And so Daisy also did have a relationship with an acquiring editor at Thomas Nelson. I think that helped as well. But so I think I was mainly just darn lucky to be able to have this friend of a friend who had an agent who introduced me and kind of backed with the track record of having sold some books myself.
So you also have another somewhat unique distinction in that you've written both adult nonfiction and a children's book. So
Yes.
can you talk a little bit about how that differs?
Well, I think one is easier to write and one is easier to produce. And it might be surprising to say. So the children's book, this is A Good Night for Mr. Coleman. So this is the children's book. And that came out of one of my readers saying that the 100-Story Home told this really great lesson of how one person can make a difference and do good in the world, and suggesting to me that I should start to try to make that a children's book. And frankly, since it had taken me 6 years and 300 pages to tell the story in the 100-Story Home, I wasn't quite sure how to do a children's book. So the writing of the children's book was much simpler than that 6-year process of trying to find an editor and publishing an adult nonfiction book. The writing a children's book, that piece of it was much simpler. Obviously, it's 1,000 words versus 75,000 words in a nonfiction memoir manuscript. But what was difficult, I thought, in the children's book is then you had to find an illustrator that was, willing to work with you. And you had to figure out, well, how do you get those illustrations and create a book? And it was important to me that it was a hardcover and not a softcover children's book. So that was a whole nother process. But I will say that there is a joy in doing children's books because they're simple, they're fun, the illustrations, that the process of making a children's book is really, really fun. Whereas those of you who are home and slogging through thousands of words on your either fiction or nonfiction manuscripts, you can know how hard it is to be redrafting and re-editing all those different words. So I think I had a lot more fun doing A Good Night for Mr. Coleman. But the process of writing, I think I just like that the best. So going forward, I think I probably will stick with adult nonfiction and that genre over the children's book. But it sure has been fun to work on the process of a children's book.
Well, I'm really glad that you did both of those. I think that they're both absolutely wonderful books.
Thanks,
And, I know that they're helpful for a lot of people. So, really glad about that. So let's switch gears now and talk about making a living as a writer. And obviously, I don't want you to share any dollar values or anything like that. But in addition to income from book royalties, what other income generating activities? I mean, you obviously do a lot of nonprofit work that you don't make money from. But what other ways do you make money, so to speak, as a writer?
Yeah, so glad we're not sharing numbers because yes, we definitely do this. I do it the writing part for love, not money. I definitely haven't found a way to, support myself fully on my writing, but it is slowly over a couple of years starting to build. One thing that I get paid to do now is speak. Originally, I spoke for free, just going to book clubs. But now I do charge when I go. I go out of town and speak, both on the book and on issues of homelessness, or I'll do keynote addresses. So I've been paid by nonprofits or by universities to come and teach. So I think speaking is one way to garner income. I teach at universities. I teach locally at Wake Forest. I teach a class in nonprofit essentials, and so I'm paid to teach. I've been doing a little bit of book coaching. So that's interesting. So if you've gone through this process and you know how hard it is, you can use your lessons to help other folks. There's a local literary group that I've been a book coach with through them. And then I just recently pitched a series to a Charlotte publication, and I'll be paid to write that series for them. So all of that is outside my writing a memoir or writing a children's book. And so they're all ways that I'm kind of building upon that. I do think having a published book kind of gives you that street cred for any of those. I've heard it said that a book is the new business card, that if you have a book that it somehow gives you credibility. That it certainly is true. When I did the work for More Place 12 years ago, no one was asking me to come speak, but as soon as the book comes out, now I get asked to speak. So I do think it's a great platform for you and something to take with you. And obviously when I speak, I sell the books as well. So.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to delve in a little bit more too, about kind of the overlap between, your book and your other activities that you described? I mean, I have to feel that they feed off each other.
Completely. I mean, if I know that there's so many writers who really don't want to speak, and that it's very intimidating. And believe me, I still sweat when I have to think about getting up and standing in front of an audience. I've learned to do it. I've learned techniques to do it. But I really think speaking is one of the best ways, not only to get yourself known to audiences, it's one of the best ways to connect with readers. I love going to events, and then people who've read the book get to connect with you in person. So that has been great. But it's also when I sell the most books. I mean, on social media, if I connect with someone, maybe that's a one-time sale, a one-time transaction. Maybe they'll buy a couple for friends if they like the book. But when you go to speak, whether it's at a church or whether it's at a university or a class, I mean, I'm selling cases of books because, the audience is so much larger, and you get to inscribe them in person to your readers, and you get to meet people. So I found speaking for me is something that I really needed to learn to get better at, because it was the best way to put the books into the world and to make relationships with the readers, and collect stories for other books.
So let's go down that path just one further step. Because you've done so well at speaking and getting speaking engagements from so many different sources. How does that typically work? I mean, do they find you, or do you solicit them, or how does that typically play out?
Well, it started by accident, frankly. I mean, I still am not rep through a speaking bureau. I still do all of my own booking and all of my own logistics for it, which can be very time consuming. But it started out just friends saying, hey, will you come to our book club and talk about the 100-story home? And so I really initially, back in 2016, I was just kind of working my way through friends' book clubs, and was willing to show up. I found out I liked it. I liked being in discussion with people and hearing what their comments were about the book, and being able to talk. So I kind of created a book club presentation, and then somebody said, hey, would you come do that for my Sunday school class? And so I went and started doing Sunday school classes. There starts to be a circuit, because people are always trying to find authors for their book clubs. They're trying to find people for their churches and their presentations. From Sunday school classes, I started doing women's luncheons, women's retreats. So it was very all grassroots and word of mouth. And I really, frankly, exhausted myself between 2016 and 17. I said yes to everything, and showed up all kinds of places. Luckily, I live in a large city, Charlotte. We have lots of churches, lots of women's groups, and I was going to all of them. And finally, in 2018, I finally started having to be a little more selective. I got a speaker's form that I would send to someone and have them fill out, so I really knew what I was coming for. And I started charging at the end of 2018, 2019. So it became more of an avenue for revenue as well as just speaking. But I think it starts just saying yes to what comes your way. I mean, my email is very prominent on my website. Someone can click it and connect directly with me. And so I try to stay in touch with readers myself, and that leads me to groups that then leads to invitations to speak.
Well, I think that you're so willing to be out there, so to speak. You're a great networker. You've got a great message, a great story. And I'm really impressed the way that you've extended it beyond just talking about homelessness, really encourage people to, as you say, do good. And yeah. I think that's really an important evolution, and I think will be an even bigger runway for you going forward.
Thanks. Yeah, I do feel like, I mean, if people read my books and become passionate about homelessness, I love that. I love that they understand the issue and then maybe want to do something in their community. But really the message of my book is understanding that I think each one of us are called to something, whatever that is. And it could be random acts of kindness to something as big as building a building. But I really do think that we each kind of come with something that we're meant to do. And that's really my message. I love to go to groups and encourage them and inspire them that, A, you're never too young. That's what my children's book is about. You're never too young to do good. My adult book is more about you're never too old to be who you're meant to be. And so that is the message that I'm continuing with as I go forward.
Well, it's clear that it's something that you're called to do, and it's so impressive to see that, and wonderful what you've been able to accomplish. So let's talk a little bit about platform.
Oh, let's talk about platform, the dreaded platform.
Everyone's least favorite subject, generally speaking.
Exactly.
So when you were first getting started, platform was probably viewed a little bit differently than it is now. Can you talk about how you've seen that evolve?
Yeah, so I think the first time I heard the word platform was when I went to a writers conference in 2014. And again, I had just this baby beginnings of a manuscript and the idea that I might write a book. And I went to this conference and I left completely depressed because I learned that I was going to need 10,000 Twitter followers or 10,000 Facebook followers or 10,000 Instagram to be considered, for someone to take a bet on with a publication house. And, I almost for a while just said, oh, forget it. I'm never going to be able to do that. So, I can't be a writer. So if I would say that to anyone, even if you don't have a platform, I think a platform can be a lot of things. Yes, it's about social media. Yes, it's about engaging with readers virtually and online. And especially if you live in a smaller community, that might be the best way for you to meet more readers. But for me, I started figuring out what did I enjoy. And I really enjoy Instagram. I used to be a graphic designer, so I think there's something about Instagram that's fun for me to craft the pictures. I post stories about people doing good. I post stories about places that I've gone and readers that I've met. And that, to me, I really enjoy that. And so I try and stick with the social media that works for me. I'm on Twitter just so I can see the conversation. I don't post a lot of original content. And the same thing with Facebook. I don't post a lot of content there, but I try and engage. And so I think for me, as I just wrote a new nonfiction book proposal, and I got to that dreaded platform area. And still, if you go on my Instagram now, you would not see a lot of followers. That section is not that strong. But my speaking platform is now really strong. Over the last few years, I now have an email list of probably 400 book club leaders, Sunday school leaders, churches, places that I've been, which connects to about 200 groups, which translates into about 20,000 people that I've spoken to over the last couple of years. And so that really is my platform. It's also really what I like to do. And as you say, I feel kind of called to do that. So I think there's different ways to find your platform, to find your people, to extend your tribe of who might be willing to listen to your message. And I think it's good to stay with things that feel authentic to you, and to try to engage readers that way. That doesn't mean that I won't try to, go to chat rooms or places where people I think will lead my message, but I really, Instagram and speaking to me are the places that I enjoy the most. And it does matter. I mean, you have to find some way to connect to an audience other than just your family and friends to buy the books. And so I understand that when I'm writing the nonfiction book proposal, it was, I still had to go back and find what my platform is. It just looks a little bit different than maybe what I thought it had to be.
Well, clearly your speaking platform is very strong and extensive. And so I think that's really an important one for you. And there's no one right answer for folks,
Yeah, and I think that's true. I think I left that speaking conference or that writers conference thinking there was only one way. And so, but I think just if I could say anything on this call, I think there's lots of ways. And so to find what's authentic to you and also what you enjoy, and you'll be better at it and you'll stick with it longer if you find the avenues that you enjoy.
So this next question you touched on a little bit, but maybe you can tell us more about new projects you're working on.
Yeah, so I guess two things. One, that the series that I pitched to the local magazine, I'm going to be doing something, a campaign called Quiet Good. And I'm going to be doing a writing series featuring local people who are maybe kind of unsung heroes that are just kind of quietly doing good in our community, but give Charlotte a better place to live. And that's going to start to be a monthly feature. And then, as I said, I wrote a nonfiction book proposal, which may seem a little left of what I was doing in the homeless world or the nonprofit world. But the subtitle of the 100-Story Home is called A Memoir of Finding Faith in Ourselves and Something Bigger. And there was this idea in the 100-Story Home of finding my own faith and finding my own way home through doing good and housing the homeless. And I realized when something very big happened in my life 7 years ago that I kind of had a faith light. The faith that I thought I found wasn't strong enough for what I was going to be dealing with. My husband was diagnosed with a rare disease, and we've had a lot of medical trauma and uncertainty the last 7 years. So I had to figure out how to live in faith, not fear. So the nonfiction book proposal I wrote is for a book called The Last Ordinary Hour, and it's about the last 7 years and the second half of my faith journey.
So that's another, exciting book that I know we're going to be looking forward to. So keep us posted.
I will, Brian. Thanks.
So you're involved in a lot of different things, and you haven't even mentioned the fact that you've got 4 daughters, if I'm correct.
I do. I have 4 daughters. So yeah, it's busy life. They are all on their own and working. Yay, we've launched 4 adults. So yes, but yes, I do have a large family to balance as well as some of this. And I still work very actively in nonprofit. I'm part of a campaign right now. We're doing another capital campaign for the homeless in Charlotte, and I'm very involved in that too.
So my question is, how do you balance all of that? And are there special tools or habits that you use?
Well, I guess for my writing, I definitely have found a special tool, and that is, kind of finding my golden hour for writing. What is that time that I can really sit and channel and be uninterrupted and do my best writing? And I found for me that is about 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. in the morning. So I'll get up, and thanks to Barbara Brown Taylor, I get up in the dark and I walk in the dark downstairs, and I sit in the same chair with the same computer, and I light the same candle, and I write early in the morning from 6 to 8 in a very uninterrupted way. And that way I can kind of chunk away at the writing that I'm doing. And then by 8, I'm done with my writing, and I get up and I do all my other things in the day, and then I don't look at my writing until the next morning at 6 a.m. I take off again. So that's how I wrote this second book. And that manuscript is finished, but I did it all early in the mornings in the dark by candlelight, finding kind of a quiet time and quiet space for writing.
Well, good for you for having the discipline to be able to do that.
Yeah, thanks.
So just to finish up, what kind of advice do you have for folks who are just getting started as writers?
I think the first thing I would say kind of goes back to the original that we were talking about, that I'd self-published as opposed to traditional publishing. And I think for the longest time I thought, well, I can't be a writer or I can't be an author unless I have a book contract. So the first thing I would say to folks is, don't let a book contract define whether you're a writer or whether you put your words in the world. It has never been easier to self-publish, to put your words into the world. And so if you have something that you're working on that you're really pleased with and you think it's in its final form, but you can't get an agent or a book contract, I would go ahead and self-publish and do that and start on the next project. And keep working on your craft and keep writing. And the second thing that I would say is I have a saying in my wall where I write, it's taped next to it, and it says, be more loyal to your dreams than to your fears. And I think I had a lot of fear about putting myself out there. I had a lot of fear about putting my faith story or what I had to say in the world, and I wasn't sure whether it was valuable. And for a while, my fears kept me back from putting those. But finally, my dreams of doing it, I decided to be more loyal to my dreams than my fears. So I think hopefully that's good advice for anyone.
Well, I certainly believe that it is, Kathy, and thank you so much for joining us. You're such a wonderful role model for authors and for all of us. And I'm very glad for you to be involved with Writing for Your Life. I'm really looking forward to the conference coming up. We'll all be together there in Charlotte. So
can't wait to see you and all of the Writing for Your Life authors. Can't wait to see Barbara Brown Taylor there. So I hope folks will join us.
Well, thanks again. Everyone will be back again next first Friday in April.
All right. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks for joining us.